Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Showing Up to Your Life podcast and YouTube channel. My name is Art Burns, and yes, I'm excited again. I'm feeling much more exciting, much more aligned, much more calm in my nervous system than I was yesterday. I'm always going to be honest with you. That's my thing, and I'm glad that it's really kind of. It's actually a really, when we practice mindfulness and we deepen our awareness and we cultivate the concepts of curiosity and non-judgment and acceptance, what happens is that even difficult days, like even a day where I had yesterday, and believe me, what I told you about in the podcast was just one part of it. It was several hours of struggle for myself, and in the past, this would have been seen as something very unpleasant and something unwanted. It's something bad, but in fact, and the reality of it is, and we can realize this reality through the practices of mindfulness and through the deepening awareness that we cultivate with mindfulness. But the fact is that it wasn't a bad day. It was actually an amazing opportunity to learn about myself, to learn learn about what triggers me, learn about learn about how I've gotten to where I am, learn about all kinds of things, all kinds of really important things. And so this is part of the core concept of mindfulness. When we talk about non-judging awareness, this is what we mean, right? It's about not judging the experience on any level. And so when we can release ourselves from the judgment on every level, then even really painful and difficult things are something that we actually feel grateful for. Right. And once we can feel grateful for the uncomfortable stuff in our lives, well, then there's really nothing that can get through to you that can really mess with you on any kind of deep level. And believe me, this is not something that's automatic, and it's not something that has always been the case, because for most of my life, I would have, as I said yesterday, I probably would have canceled appointments. I wouldn't have recorded my podcast. I would have just, stayed in bed and felt sorry for myself, that kind of thing, and as it was, the day certainly wasn't the same kind of productive that it normally would be. I definitely was struggling, but in the struggle, I found myself. In the struggle, I discovered something that's really important, right? And that discovery, that important discovery, is really just the knowledge of who I am, right? As I talked about earlier in the week, I got in touch with my artness, right? My Art Burns-ness. And it's really, so I know yesterday I said I wasn't going to share the story, but I think I want to, if you don't mind. I'm going to share just a little bit of the story. So one of the things that is alive for me, right, and one of the things that has been a big impact for me over the years, right, is that I tend to take on a lot of responsibility, right, and it's a part of my personality, which is part of the shadow, right? And we'll get back to that in a second, right? But the functional aspect of this, right? The functional result of my, just inherently and innately, taking on more responsibilities, perhaps more than I really deserve, right? More than I carry more than I'm supposed to carry, right? And because of this sort of nature, or this aspect of my nature, right, the aspect of my ness, right, it comes to, well, the aspect of my ness is the desire to be contributive, right? Like that's where the desire comes from, or that's where the root of this is, right? But the shadow, right, is something that that I've been driven to feel like, if I'm not productive, if I don't have a lot of responsibilities, then somehow I'm doing something wrong. Okay, we'll get back into that in a second. But the result of this, the practical result of this, right, actually ended up in what I believe is a form of PTSD, actually. And I've experienced PTSD from a violent assault that I was a victim of many, many years ago. So I know about PTSD, and I feel that what's happening now is, like what I experienced yesterday was a trigger of a PTSD, right? Which is all PTSD is post-traumatic stress disorder, right? A trauma is one of those things that's stored in our bodies, right? It's stored in our nervous system, right? And so when you experience a deep trauma, right, the stress that puts on your body, creates a disorder, right? And so, and of course, it's, post-traumatic stress, right? It's something it's happened after an experience, right? So it's like, the reminder and the constant, it's almost like that experience or the feelings of that experience are so close that it just takes a little poke to get there. That's what post-traumatic stress disorder is about. It means that you're more easily triggered, right? It means that this experience is always just right there, right? And all the emotions that you experienced as part of that experience are right there. Right. And of course, because it's traumatic experience is very powerful, and it's obviously very, very painful and very difficult. Right. And so that's how post-traumatic stress disorder works. Right. So yes, I experienced post-traumatic stress through the experience of a violent assault that I was a victim of. Right. But also something else that I kind of brought on my own post-traumatic stress in a certain sense. I mean, it wasn't completely on my choice, but again, I have this innate, part of my shadow is this feeling that if I'm not being responsible, if I don't have responsibilities, if I don't have a lot to do, then I feel somehow that I'm a failure, or I'm not living up to what I'm supposed to be doing. It's not real, right? But it's just this thing that's alive for me. And where this comes from, or where this was really manifest, is so for about, I think it was a little like 8.5 years between 2009 and 2016. Yeah, so it would have been 7 years. Well, no. 2008 to 2000. Anyway, for in that sort of area, right? I owned a small cafe. Right. And it was a bagel shop. Right. So with bagel shops, one of the keys is that you got to get up really, like somebody has to get up really early and bake the bagels, right? It's like, got to make the donuts, right? That old commercial that I'm dating myself with that one. You have to be really old to remember the Dunkin' Donuts, got to make the donuts guy. But that's how I felt, I was literally, because what I soon found out is that, even if you pay somebody a lot of money to be a baker, it's, people are not that reliable. And many times, I was called at, 4 o'clock in the morning. I was woken up with my phone by the baker saying like, oh, my car won't start. I can't get in. And he's slurring his words, and he's obviously inebriated and stuff. So it's like, okay, so if I'm doing it anyway, and I never know if I'm going to get get to sleep, I just became the baker. Right. And so every morning at 4 o'clock in the morning, and virtually 7 days a week, at times I was getting up at 4 o'clock in the morning. I was going in, I was baking the bagels, and then I was working all day, serving customers, making sandwiches, making food, cooking on the griddle, depending on what was going on and who was there and stuff. And so I go through a whole day, right? And I mean, on a good day, about 12 hours, I would be kind of heading home, but on many days, 12 hours was 16 hours. And some days it was even 19 hours. Literally, I would leave my home, and the bagel shop was literally like a par 4 away from my house. So it took no more than 90 seconds to work there. So I would leave my house at 4 a.m. and not return home until a little after 11, right? So literally a 19-hour day, right? And that was like almost every Friday night, right? Because I had to prep so much for the weekend. I had to go to Sam's Club and buy stuff for the weekend. It was tremendous, right? And in all of this, right, I also had a family, right? And at the time, my wife wasn't a driver, right? And so I had, also, anything that we needed from the store, I had to drive and get it. Anywhere my kids had to go, I had to drive them. I would drive my wife and kids, like, before I started making the bagels in the evening, because you make the dough the night before, right? And so before I started making the bagels, I would drive them to like an indoor, inflatable park that we called Jumpin' Jakes at the time. And then I'd have to like time, when I go pick them up, like in between my batches of bagels. Like it was so hard. It was such a hard life. And it was literally like every single day like that. And also, again, I had to do all the grocery shopping. I was the one who did all the laundry. I was the one who, took out the garbage and all this kind of stuff. And it was just constant, right? And for 8 years, right? And so I developed a level of post-traumatic stress from all of that difficult responsibility, right? And of course, but even when I was staggering home after 16 hours of working on my feet the whole time, lifting 25-pound bags of flour and like they're nothing, and just, just doing all this stuff, I would still, when I got home, I would take a shower. I would, get myself, eat a little something, take a shower, and I would read to my kids, and I would draw pictures with them, and I would make sure that I spent the time with them, right? So fast forward to, last night, and, my wife came home from work, and, my wife didn't work for many years. For many years, she was simply a stay-at-home mom, and she was a great stay-at-home mom, and I'm so grateful for all that she did, right? And it became much easier once she got her driver's license, but even when she didn't, it was still something I was so grateful for, and I don't want you to get the impression that I'm like an angry guy towards my wife in any way. I'm not, okay? I'm very, love my wife, love my family. It's a beautiful thing that we have, right? But one of the things that, my wife just recently started working full time again about a year ago, right? And so she works she manages a health food store, and so she's on her feet all the time. She's dealing with lots of, people in health food stores, customers come in and they want to talk to you about some very personal stuff. And it's like, so I know how difficult she's having it. Right. And one of the points of contention that we've had over the last, 6-9 months or something like that was, because I have a lot of work to do now, and I'm asking her to contribute and be, kind of, when you come home, I'm going to bed because I got early meetings. Can you stay up with the kids and or with at least one of our kids and play games and do drawings and do all that stuff, But the fact of the matter is, for better or worse, or whether I like it or not, it's hard. My wife works and she's got like about a 9.5-hour shift, and she, there's a lot of days where she comes home and she's just spent. It's not her fault, right? And it's not something that I intentionally want to, resent her for, right? But the other night, 2 nights ago, she came home and I was already in bed and looking to go to sleep. The kids were all like, still bouncing off the walls, and it was like, 10 o'clock at night or something like that. And my wife was like, I'm so tired, I have a headache, I'm going to bed right now. And, and all it took was that little thing, right, to bring up all of that memory, right? All of that memory which resides in my nervous system. Right? It's not just here. It's here. It's in my whole body. And all of you on the podcast, I'm saying it's not here as I'm pointing to my head, and I'm saying it's in here as I'm waving towards my body in general, right? Because that's how it works, right? It's in there, and it's just like I'm trying to think of a metaphor that I can use for this, but it's almost like, what it is. Here's a great metaphor. It's like when a campfire, right? Like how hard it is to start a campfire, right? Anybody who's ever started a campfire knows that. I mean, it's if you know what you're doing, it's not that hard, but it takes some doing, right? It's not something where you just snap your fingers and the fire's just blazing, right? It takes some effort. You got to start with little pieces of wood and some sort of igniter, and then start adding bigger pieces of wood until you get a real fire going, right? Now, what happens with the campfire is if you let it, smolder down, right, and all the flames go out, and then all you have is the embers, right? And even at a certain point, the ember, there's a layer of ash that covers the embers, so you can't even see the embers glowing, right? But and this works in a fireplace too. It's not just campfires, but any kind of fire that you're burning wood, right? That's what happens, and so it looks like there's nothing there. It looks like it's just a pile of stuff. Like there's nothing there. But just underneath that ash, there are hot coals. And if you just put one piece of wood on there and maybe blow on it a little bit, and just a little bit, all of a sudden you have a blazing fire again. Right? And it takes just a second to get to a blazing fire again. And so if any of you have seen that before, that is exactly how post-traumatic stress works. right? And so all it took the other night was for that little statement, that little, and of course, in the scheme of things, like as a, from a neutral standpoint, my wife wanting to go to bed early, I mean, that's not a bad thing, right? Even though, yeah, it's best if she could manage the kids, but if she can't, she can, and that's okay, right? So it shouldn't be a big deal because my wife wanted to go to bed, right? But again, all it took was that little pinprick to just boom. And I became completely triggered, right? Now, fortunately for me, I've been doing these practices. And so I was able to function the next day, even though inside I was really in a big, big time turmoil. Right. But I was able to function. I was able to do my podcast. I was able to meet with, I think I met with 3 different individual clients plus a group coaching call. So I had a full plate. I did all of my stuff and I did it very well. Right. So it's not to say that I can't function in the place of this trigger now, right? Because now I have the tools with which to manage this whole this whole process and this whole activity of my body, right? But again, 10 years ago, no way I would have gone through the day. No way. I would have just, I would have been like, sorry, not happening today. No podcast, no meetings. I'm calling everything off. I'm just, laying in bed all day and watching TV, right? And back then, I actually, 10 years ago, I would have been drinking beer or whiskey in the middle of the day, smoking pot, all day long, and feeling sorry for myself, saying the world is out to get me and I have to medicate myself in order to feel better. So I'm happy to say that that's no longer the case, right? And which is very much because of the tools of mindfulness that I have. But really what I want to discuss is I want to reflect back on what we talked about these last couple of days, right? Because this is part of my shadow. Right? There's 2 things, right? Number one, the lives in my nervous system, right? And for me, right, the other thing that lives in my nervous system is anger. Right. So growing up, again, I've told you here, I was around a lot of people who were, particularly edgy, and like, always poking fun at each other, always. And for all of the people in my life, my mother, my father, my grandparents, there was a time once where my mother was screaming at me not to unlock my door because my grandfather wanted to beat the F out of me, and so there was a lot of anger around me, right? So I programmed myself into anger, right? And it's something I'm dealing with my 9-year-old son right now, that he has the anger in him. It's in his nervous system, right? It's not his fault. He didn't live the same life I did. He's not surrounded with people who are angry all the time. In fact, he's surrounded with the opposite. He's surrounded with he's got a father who's constantly talking to him about empathy and compassion and kindness. My father never talked about those things. So it's not it's not the nurture, it's the nature. Right? Because this anger lives in his nervous system. Now, that might be something very different for you. And for instance, it's very different for my wife, right? My wife doesn't go to an angry place. My wife goes to a withdrawn and sad and shame place when she's triggered. That is the types of people that she was surrounded by. So you can see how this steeping in our nervous system happens. Right? And again, it's not just what's happened in my son's life. It's not just what happened in my life. It happens generationally. And it's very important to recognize that because when we realize that it's not our fault, then we can disidentify with it. And then we don't feel shame over it. We don't feel regret over it. We don't feel all of those negative emotions over it, so that we can now see it more clearly. And when we can see it more clearly, we can work with it. And when we can work with it, we can integrate it back into our consciousness, right? Because now, again, when I said the second thing here, right? The first thing I wanted to display is how this all lives in my nervous system, and it's there. All it needs is just a little spark, and it'll go right to a blaze. That's my life. Now, it's more and more manageable, and it's going to be more and more regulatable, right? And so eventually it's no longer a thing where you just, you're going to explode, right? And it takes a lot now. I mean, this was a particularly, specific thing that happened to me the other night that my wife said. It touched a specific and very tender nerve that deals with PTSD. So most people don't experience that level, right? So I want to give you some hope that this is all stuff that, that with work, it does get better. Okay. So, all right. But the second thing that I want to talk about is how this relates to the shadow, right? That my shadow, right, has something to do. And this is, I could tell you where it comes from, but it's a deeply personal thing, but it comes from my father. And it comes from, at one point, this is a very deeply personal story. And this was actually this story and the awareness and the therapy around this story, this specific story, is actually the thing that started me in mindfulness. I told you I worked with someone who was a spiritual healer, and she's the one that really got me started in this, right? And the first time I met her, she asked me to pick the first time that came to my mind that I felt as a child, that I felt broken, that I felt like I was just like I was fractured. Right. And the time that came to mind was one morning where, my parents had been separated for about 7 or 8 years or something like that. And they got to maybe actually like 10 years, and they got together. Right. And we moved into the apartment where my dad lived uptown. Right. We left our apartment and left all of my friends and went to, live with him. So there was a lot of weird emotions going on with that. And, and there was not a lot of therapy. There's certainly not a lot of mindfulness. It was very disturbing and confusing time for me. But one of the benefits, one of the good shining moments was for one semester, right? After we moved uptown, I had a walkable commute to my school for just that one semester, right? I had like 4 blocks to walk to school. And then they sent me to a school that was all the way back down that would have been a simple walk from my old apartment. It's just part of the torture that my parents put me through. And so I had this extra time all of a sudden, right? And so one morning, a couple of weeks after I was living with my father again, that we were living together as a family again, I was sitting on the edge of my bed and I was just listening to the radio. Right. I used to love the radio in the morning. I used to listen to the DJs. They had jokes. All the songs, I was a big rock and roll fan. I loved it. I loved music so much. And honestly, it's always been something where I've been driven. I felt like a pull to play music, And this particular experience is one of the reasons why I don't play music, at least not, professionally on any kind of level. So my father comes into my bedroom and he sees me sitting there and he says, "What are you doing?" Like this disgusted look on his face, like, "What are you doing?" I said, "I'm not doing anything. I'm just sitting here listening to music. Why? Like, is this wrong? Like, what, like, how could this possibly be bothering anybody? I'm just sitting listening to music. I'm literally not doing anything." And he looked at me, he said, "But you're just sitting there listening to music? I could see, listening to music while you're doing something, while you're getting stuff done. But don't you think this is kind of stupid?" Right? To a 13-year-old kid, a 12-year-old kid at the time, 12 years old. So that became part of my shadow, right? And a deep and dark part of my shadow and a scary part of my shadow, right? I had this sense that just being idle is bad, right? Like that was what was buried into, or I guess more technically, the thing that was buried into my shadow was the idea that I could just sit and do nothing and just enjoy music, right? Or I could play music and I could just do music for the sake of the music, right? Like that part of my consciousness and my awareness was buried in that shadow. Right. And the negative connotations that came with that, right? That became part of my shadow. Right. And so through the work of mindfulness and all of the work that I've done over the years, right, I'm seeing that now. Right. And that's what happened the other day, yesterday, all day yesterday. I was, I journaled a bunch about it. I did I did like 3 or 4 meditations yesterday. I was throwing everything I had at it, just gotta, bring my nervous system down, understand it, work through it, grow through it, get into this, and don't run away from it. Don't try to just medicate and move on. Don't take it out on everybody. Don't do something maladaptive, but instead really center into it and lean into it and step towards it and turn towards it, right? And in doing that, right, that's when I discover, I see the connection. I can see like exactly, the reason why I became this obsessive, uber responsible guy, where I just took on the weight of everybody. And it wasn't like somebody had a gun to my head, during all those years at the bagel shop. I took it on. And it wasn't that much, wasn't that dissimilar to how I used to be in the advertising business. In my role in advertising, it was the print production. So I was at press OKs at 2 a.m. I was flying around the world. And one time I took literally a same-day trip to Lyon, France, and back to New York. Literally in one day. I flew across the ocean and back in one day. I mean, who does that, right? But I was happy to do it because it was my responsibility, right? So I can connect the dots on how all this happens, right? And now I can see it very, very clearly. And what comes from this, right, is that I did not confront my wife yesterday about this, that she dared to want to go to sleep, right? But now that things have calmed down, and now that I'm in a more, baseline kind of state, well, now I can have a meaningful conversation about it with my wife. If I tried to bring it up yesterday, it would have been yelling at her. It would have been saying, how dare you trigger me like that? Don't you know better? Right? And then that's going to cause a reaction in her. And now we're just going to be in this conflict that has absolutely nothing to do with anything of the moment, right? And it's going to completely distract us, and it's going to completely derail things. But instead, I can lay back, I can take a few deep breaths, I can wait until the appropriate time, the appropriate opportunity arises. And then we can have a beautiful and meaningful and helpful conversation so that I can ask her to help me get through this, right? And there's many ways that it can be done. It doesn't mean that she has to stay up late, right? There's just communication that can happen so that I don't get triggered, right? But that's my self-defense. Like that's on me. I own that. And I have to make accommodations for that. I can't expect everybody else in the world to accommodate me. I have to accommodate me. And it's only in this calm, non-judging, accepting, and curious and compassionate awareness that I can see that, and that I can take the actions appropriate to that. So anyway, I hope you enjoy that very personal story. I hesitate to share real personal stuff here because I don't want to bore everybody with it, but I hope you enjoyed it. And I hope you found it helpful. I hope maybe something I said today helps you to understand something about this whole mechanism with you, right? Because it's lots of different things happening at the same time, right? It's not just the shadow, and it's not just how stress and emotions live in our nervous system and the memory of that. It's all of it. And there's other stuff too, right? And this all kind of contributes to the judging, to the non-acceptance, to the reactivity. It's all part and parcel of the same concept and the same process. And it all becomes understood with the deepening awareness that can be cultivated through the practices of mindfulness. And that is what I do for a living now. And so if you would like to know, if you would like some help in starting some of these practices, I welcome your call. And I will put a link in the description so that you can call me, so you can book a call with me, and we can have a 45-minute conversation about any of this or anything else that you would like to talk about. And if you want to learn about my coaching services, that would be a great way to do it. All right, everybody. Thank you for watching. Thank you for listening. I wish you well, and I'll be back again tomorrow. Take care, everybody. Bye-bye.